Muy buenos días, amigos de Ático de los Libros, y bienvenidos a otra charla del Ático. Hoy tenemos el inmenso placer de estar con Tristan Gooley, autor de las estaciones ocultas, y que, bueno, seguro que lo conoceréis porque ha publicado multitud de libros también en Ático, entre los que se cuentan El instinto natural, Cómo leer un árbol, Cómo leer el agua, las estaciones ocultas que presentamos, y también El mundo secreto del clima y guía para caminantes. Tristan Gooley, estoy seguro que ya lo sabéis, es navegante, aventurero, naturalista y un auténtico experto en lo que es descifrar las pistas que ofrece la naturaleza, una especie de Sherlock Holmes de la naturaleza, y también un Indiana Jones que, por ejemplo, ha liderado expediciones a los 5 continentes, ha escalado cumbres en multitud de ellos, y bueno, es la única persona viva que ha cruzado en solitario el Atlántico en barco y también en avión. Además de todo ello, escribe para el Sunday Times, para el New York Times, para el Wall Street Journal, ha colaborado con la BBC y es miembro del Royal Institute of Navigation y de la Royal Geographical Society británicas. Y bueno, pues como veníamos diciendo, es un auténtico placer estar con Tristan Gooley para hablar sobre todo de las estaciones ocultas. Tristan, it's a pleasure to be with you today here.
Oh, great to be with you.
Yeah. So the first question I want to ask you about your job description, because you're a natural navigator. What does it mean?
Yes, so I was fascinated by journeys as a child, and I found out quite young that journeys were much more interesting to me when I was shaping them myself. I was much more drawn to a short journey where I could feel I am here, that's where I'd like to go, and this is how I would like to get there.
Mhm.
And I found out that the art of navigation, the wonderful art and science of navigation, is the skill that allows us to shape our own journeys. And I often say these days, every journey we go on, we are either a navigator or a passenger. And there
Mhm.
is nothing wrong with being a passenger, but it is more intriguing to sometimes choose to be a navigator. And we all do. It's not about
Mhm.
crossing oceans. It's sometimes about that, but very rarely. How we choose to park a car or walk to the bathroom in the middle of the night. These are navigation decisions. But what I found was that I fell in love with navigation, and for decades, from
Yeah.
my teen years until my mid 20s, I was totally enthralled to the idea that learning conventional navigation, all the modern skills,
Mhm.
would entertain me, and it did. But then I started to find that some of the magic had gone. In the words of the novelist Sir Ben Okri, he
Mhm.
said he was fascinated in physics as a child, but then the poetry left the physics, and I knew exactly what he meant. He meant that the feeling of magic and joy and wonder had disappeared, and so in my 20s, I turned everything on its head. I didn't entirely stop, but I shifted my emphasis from long journeys to short journeys, only using my environment for my map and compass. And that has been my what started as a hobby, and then the hobby took over my life and became my livelihood. But that is what I
Mhm.
mean to be a natural navigator.
Yeah. So did you grow up in a city or in the countryside? Because like for a natural navigator, one would say that you grew up in the countryside.
Yeah, it's interesting. My childhood, I didn't think until really quite recently my childhood would have had much bearing on this, but it's
Mhm.
partly, I think, being honest, I think it's not an area I've thought about a lot. I didn't have a sort of joyous skipping through the countryside type of childhood. It was quite a difficult childhood. There was a lot of moving. There was
Mhm.
nowhere in the first 10 years of my life when I look back I think of as home. So
Mhm.
it was difficult, but it was neither especially rural nor especially urban. There was quite a lot of both at different times. But it wasn't. Yes, I wasn't a child of the woods, and that's where it all came from. It was a very different route into nature, which I think has helped me approach nature differently from most nature writers. So if I can expand on that a bit,
Mhm.
I
Sure.
think a lot of nature writers, I mean, to start,
Mhm.
I would say anybody who's trying to understand the natural world and share what they've learned in any form is almost without exception doing an interesting and positive thing, and probably without great reward, financially. So the
I believe
motives
it.
tend to be pretty pure and honest. but but what tends to happen is the people who
Mhm.
are drawn to do that have an innate love of nature,
Okay.
which is a lovely thing. But I feel that that is a minority thing in the modern for the modern person.
Mhm.
Perhaps if I had to guess, 10% of people have an innate love of nature
Mhm.
who've been experienced to the modern contemporary lifestyle. So what tends to happen, I think, in a lot of nature writing and communication is it's the 10% talking to the 10%.
Mhm.
Whereas if your love of nature, as in my case, comes from a very, very different place, you're not assuming in yourself or your readers an automatic love of nature. And
Mhm.
in my writing and my love of nature, it's different because I'm doing a different pact instead of the relationship with nature being, this bee, this butterfly, this flower is
Okay.
automatically interesting. What I'm saying is, here's the deal. I'm going to give this bird or this rock or this cloud some of my curiosity, and what I want in return is some meaning. I want a clue or a sign,
Mm.
and that is a different perspective, and I think it appeals to the to a broader congregation than just the minority who from a very young age knew they were fascinated by nature.
Yeah. So in a sense, it's like to help that 90% of people that don't have that innate love of nature cultivate that love of nature, because I guess that love of nature can be cultivated, or is that merely like instinct?
Yeah, I think it's I think the instinct is there, but
Mhm.
sometimes buried in all of us. And what I'm sometimes doing in my work is giving people a route back to it by not assuming that it's near the surface.
Mhm.
So if I take an example that's not directly related to my work, so if somebody, for example, enjoys food and cooking, if you say to them, wow, look at that butterfly, they might sort of be polite and smile and nod, but they might be thinking, what's that? That just doesn't really interest me all that much.
Mm.
Or you might say, look at that beautiful flower, they might have the same feeling. But if you point to a plant and say, this is the plant that leads to these sorts of flavors and tones and
Okay.
food, suddenly that person is going, I see a bridge now. There is
Mhm.
a bridge from my what I think is my innate world to the natural world, and that's so in natural navigation. It's journeys, but most people, I think, have an interest in travel at some point. I haven't met many people in my life who say,
Hmm.
travel, I hate everything about. Excuse me, I hate everything about travel. I want to stay in the same spot my whole life. One or two people like that may exist, but for most
Mhm.
people, there is some interest in journeys, and so there is this possibility to get back to nature by saying, the next time I catch a bus, or the next time I get on a train, or drive a car, I'd like to know what the sky is telling me. That might not sound somebody like that's getting back to nature, but if you notice every time you drive to visit a friend for lunch that you're squinting because you're heading south towards the sun, for example,
Hmm.
that
Yeah.
that that is one step back into connection with nature.
Great, great. So, what would the reader discover in the hidden seasons?
So what I do with each of my books is I take the same core philosophy. And I think of it as a hub and spoke model. We have the hub at the center of the wheel, and that's my core philosophy, which is things we see outdoors are not random. They have a
Mhm.
cause, and if we understand what the cause is, then we find a clue and a sign, and it's helpful in terms of our ancestral and evolutionary past, but it's now more about interest, intrigue, and having fun.
Mhm.
So that's the hub, and each spoke is an approach to that philosophy. So in past books, I've looked at water with how to read water, or trees, how to read a tree, or I take a slightly different angle. In the hidden seasons, the hub is the same. It's the idea that we are going to find clues and signs in nature, but I'm
Mhm.
coming at it from the perspective of annual change, seasonal change. So I'm explaining to people, for a clue to work, we have to understand why something is the way it is.
Mhm.
If we look at a bunch of flowers, it's we're coming into spring as we're sort of chatting, and
Yeah.
we are going to see a lot of wildflowers over the coming weeks. We might take a moment to notice they're all facing the same way. But we then have to pause and say, why are they all facing the same way?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. They're trying to attract insects because insects are their pollinators, and
Hmm.
they attract more insects the more light they reflect. So if they face towards the southern sun, they're going to attract more insects. So we have a compass there, but it's
Hmm.
understanding. So what I'm doing is taking the reader at different times of the year and saying this is where you will find the most interesting signs at this time of year.
Yeah. So what do you mean by nature clues?
Yeah, it's the if we take a very very simple pillar which supports my work, which is that everything has a cause.
Hmm.
So the brain is very very busy. It is by some estimates hit by 11 million bits of information per second from the
Oof.
senses. Yeah, so one of the most important jobs the brain does, and it does it very well, but very ruthlessly and
Hmm.
efficiently, is to tell us that we don't need to focus or understand things.
Hmm.
So a good example is if you are walking with a friend, let's say not on a busy city street for this example, somewhere where it's a little bit calm, maybe you're looking
Hmm.
over a field or something like that, or a quiet part of a park. If you say to your friend, I just want you to look at that scene for 20 seconds, you then get out a piece of paper, and where they can't see, you secretly write down some things on the piece of paper.
Hmm.
And you then turn to your friend and say, these are the things you noticed. They will say, that's magic. How did you know? And you say, well, I know that you spotted the plastic bag that was blown by the wind, and you spotted the bird taking off, and you spotted the ripples in the pond. The reason you saw those three things is because of motion and colors that stand out, anomalous colors,
Okay.
because that is what we have evolved to notice. But what I am always doing in my work is saying to people, there are certain things we will notice without trying, but the
Hmm.
brain is binning a lot of stuff that has really really interesting meaning. But we have to pause and say to our brain, wait a minute, I want to spend a second understanding why the leaves are angled that way, and from that we find meaning. But the pillar is that there is a cause for everything, um, and if we just pause, and I don't expect people to spend even an hour a day doing this sort of thing. My aim is more realistic. I want people to spend 5 to 10 minutes
Well,
of their lunch break just sort of saying, why was it that the last time I looked in this pond I couldn't see the bottom, but now I can? That is something, or this lake, that is something that changes with the seasons. And once you understand why that happens,
hmm,
it because our our brain likes rewards. It's nobody would go for a run if there weren't some good reasons to do it. It
yeah.
makes us feel better. That's why we do it. And the brain has a similar reward system. Sometimes we go for the wrong rewards in inverted commas. If we eat a big bar of chocolate, yes, we do
Hmm.
feel good for about 10 minutes, but we know that half an hour after that, we're not going to feel so great. Whereas there are certain things we can do with our brain which take a tiny bit of effort to begin with, but then, like exercise, make us feel better afterwards. And looking for clues and signs in nature is in that area. What we are doing is we are saying, okay, the tiny bit of effort is I'm actually going to spend 5 minutes having a look at the colors in the sky or the colors in this tree and trying to understand what they're telling me. Then when we find the clue, we get a reward, a literal brain chemistry reward. And we feel good, and there are no downsides. But that's the expression, there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Yeah.
So what I'm effectively saying to people is, take two steps to find the better lunch. Don't get
Mm.
your brain stimulation just from your smartphone. Of course, everybody's going to do that every day. Again, I'm not living in a pretend world, but for if let's say you walk in a park for half an hour some lunch times, and you spend half an hour sitting on a bench with your phone. Sometimes I'm just saying, 5 minutes of it, watch what a pigeon's doing, and try and understand the clue it is
Okay.
giving, because there will definitely be one.
Mhm. Yeah. So the thesis of your book is that mainly like the big concept of season of uh, winter, autumn, spring, and summer. They are really broad concepts and really rough concepts. In reality, they're like more like kind of micro seasons. Am I right of that kind of micro seasons? So can you dwell on that thesis that they are not really big seasons but micro seasons?
Yeah, so the book has monthly chapters. So it actually starts in late February, because that is because I want people to see things quickly. And the truth is, late winter is not the most exciting time. So starting in January is not how to get people into the subject quickly. But but I'm also not taking the view, as you're saying, that the months are the critical things. That's a very helpful way to get, to help readers into the
Yeah.
subject, because we all understand the difference between February, March, and April. But the point I'm making in the book is I'm explaining why things happen when they do. And part of that explanation, a lot of it has to do with the length of day and night and temperatures. But a really sort of what seems like an obvious thing, but many of the most interesting things are obvious in hindsight, is that nature is not looking at the same calendar as us. We kind of know that an insect or a plant is not flicking through a calendar going, oh, it's March, I better do this now. We of course know that, and I'm being silly, but there is a really profound point underneath that, which is that, you know, each plant, animal, and other part of nature has its own season by being sensitive to its world. So let me give you an actual example, so
Sure.
this makes sense. So temperature is a big part of how nature reads its calendar. If it's warm in spring, things start happening. But if it's still cold, nothing's happening. But what is interesting from that is we can actually see the seasons change by moving. Because if you walk uphill or head north in the northern hemisphere, the average temperature drops. And what that means is, let's say, for example, it's early April and you've started to see certain flowers appearing, and you're let's say in a park that's quite low, not far above sea level. And then that weekend you head up into the hills or the mountains, and you're perhaps suddenly 1,000 meters higher than you were. Those flowers aren't there. Now, if we had a sort of amusing pretend conversation, and we said to the flowers at the bottom, oh, it's wonderful that you are in blossom now. Why is that? And they say, because it's early April. We then go to the other flowers that haven't blossomed up the top of the hill and say, it's early April. Why haven't you blossomed? They would reply to us, yeah, but it's not early April for me. It's only early April down there. Do you see what I'm saying? Is
Yeah,
the
yeah.
words are not the calendar. The calendar are things like the length of day and night and temperature and a few other things like water.
Yeah, so which are like the main the key factors of that nature calendar you've mentioned? Of course, temperature. Which are like what are like the other factors?
Yeah, so it took some good science, which really got going in about the 18th century, and a lot of it in Europe, where we a lot of the best science is taking things again which appear obvious and saying, wait a minute, how is that working? So a good example is, for tens of thousands of years, long prehistory, humans and other animals have known that in spring the days get longer and temperatures get warmer. But it took some quite interesting science to work out exactly what's going on. And now we know that plants, for example, are gauging the length of the night. As the night gets shorter,
Wow.
yeah, it triggers certain chemical changes within the plants. It's almost like opening a gate. But the opening the gate is a good, interesting analogy here, because what actually happens for most plants and animals is, as the night gets shorter, it's like there's a hand on the gate, but the hand will not open the gate unless the plant or animal has counted enough warm days. So so that's why every year is very slightly different. So we know we're not going to see the trees come into leaf, in November, but the reason is generally this combination, and it leads to some quite interesting pairings. So, for example, in trees, there's a thing called vernalization, which and
Hmm.
all that means is one of the ways that the trees check that it's spring and not autumn is they check for a cold period. So
Hmm.
if there hasn't been a cold few weeks in the couple of months before, the trees are effectively going, it can't be spring. And the
Hmm.
reason for that is we know the days get longer in spring and shorter at the end of summer and into autumn. But there is a time, late March and late September, the equinoxes, when the length of day and night are the same. Now, if all the plants and animals were doing were gauging the length of day and night,
Hmm.
they
Oh,
could confuse late September for late March,
yeah.
which would be catastrophic. So vernalization is what evolution has taught the trees to do. They go, okay, we want the day and the night to be, let's say, roughly the same length. Um, but we want to check there's been a very cold period in the previous couple of months. If those two things are true, the tree goes, it's spring, let's come into leaf soon.
Hmm.
If there hasn't been that cold period, the tree might well not come into leaf. And we see the same thing at the other end. So, for example, we see more fungi when there's been a frost in autumn, because again, the organism is going, okay, the nights are long enough now. This is roughly my time to fruit and make a mushroom. But if there hasn't been a frost, what time of year is it?
Yeah.
Is it deep enough into autumn? So we can think of temperature as being the thing that takes opens the gate. The length of day or night puts the hand on the gate, and then if the temperatures are right, the gate gets pushed open.
Okay, so how does that mix, like for example, with phenomena like llama's growth? Because llama's growth is like growing new leaves in August, more or less. So doesn't that contradict what we've been talking about?
Well, no, it's the exact parameters that trigger. So just in case people haven't come across Lammas growth,
Hmm.
what evolution again has taught the trees is that early spring is a very hungry time for animals. So any plants that put out a flush of new growth of leaves can expect to lose a lot of them to insects or to browsing animals like deer and things like this.
Hmm.
So what the trees have learned through evolution is we're not going to put all of our resources out really early, because we're effectively feeding the animals, which is not what we're trying to
Hmm.
do with our leaves. We're obviously trying to harvest sunlight. So evolution has taught the trees that by late summer, by August,
Hmm.
most of the animals have got most of the energy they need, because spring and summer is
Okay.
typically yeah, it's a time of reproduction, which means you need huge amounts of energy, because as we know from the human experience, mothers, mothers to be are often say, I'm eating for two, and it's
Yeah.
true. And it's true of the animal world as well, which is why they're so voracious and they eat so much in spring. But using the length of day and night and the temperatures again, the tree is able to go, okay, we're past the middle of summer now. There won't be quite so many hungry insects in particular. So let's put out this late flush of growth, and it appears as paler leaves, and it's just a clever way of harvesting some sunlight without just feeding the animals.
Hmm. Yeah. So temperature, daylight, and moonlight. How is moonlight important for that like natural calendar?
Yes, there are. The moon's phases and its light are not the governing sort of mechanism for
Hmm.
for many organisms at all. There are some worms in the Pacific, for example, the palolo worms that their cycle is governed by the moon. And it does have influences in a smaller way in lots of things, but there are some quite interesting effects of the moon. So there's some research done which suggests the how close the moon is to us, which will
Hmm.
affect the gravity. The effect of gravity does influence childbirth a little bit, but not in a way that we would actually notice. But one
Okay.
of the more interesting areas is actually the dawn chorus. So when we hear birds singing at the start of the
Yeah.
day, um, that is related to light levels, and of course if there's a full moon, it's going to get light. There's going to be more light earlier, and so what we find is for the times when there's a bright moon early in the morning, the dawn chorus will start earlier, and the times when we don't see the moon in the morning, the dawn chorus will start slightly later than average, and that feeds into the other areas of the dawn chorus. So it means that, if you are very, very regular in your habits, if perhaps you have an alarm clock and you have to set off at
Yeah.
exactly the same time for work or something every day, or school or whatever, then you may notice that on cloudy days the dawn chorus starts later. Because the birds, it's a bit like they're not looking at a calendar, they're also not looking at a clock. So what they are doing is they're waiting till the light levels reach the level they want, and then they start singing. So on a cloudy day, it takes longer, so it's later.
Yeah. So, for example, let's go back to bird calls, because there's something really interesting to talk about in your book. There's like a hierarchy in the birds that conduct the chorus, and that hierarchy has to do with the size of the bird's eye. So, can you delve into that, because it's so interesting?
Yes, there are established hierarchies and orders for the birds, and there are hierarchies within species. So
Yeah.
something I write about in the book is that we had a cockerel in our garden. We had about three cockerels actually, and one of them would be the first bird to start crowing in the morning, and it was really early. It was, sometimes
Yeah.
4:30, 5 o'clock. Not a time that I'm a morning person, but even I don't want to get up at that time. Um, and and I had the thought, well, that one cockerel is starting, 10 minutes before everyone else. I think, we might have to find a new home for that cockerel. But what I now know, which I didn't know, this was about 10 years ago, I didn't know then, is it wouldn't have worked, because within a group of birds, and this is true throughout the animal kingdom,
Mhm.
the hierarchy means that if you take away the leader, the one at the top, or in this case the earliest one, the next one will just step forward. So it's a little bit like, if the analogy, I don't know whether it survived into the book. I don't think it did. I think it got cut in the edit. But the analogy I wanted to use in the book was, imagine you go to see uh, a a comedy show or something like that, and there are going to be
Mhm.
kind of 12 people on the stage, and the idea is that one of the 12 is going to start the show at 7 p.m. If they phone in ill and say to the other 11, I'm really sorry, I can't make it tonight, I'm not well,
Mhm.
the show will still start at 7. It's the
Yeah.
same concept with the birds. There is a dominance hierarchy, and that will affect the orders. But we find that there's also, a little bit like, there's a pecking order in food. If you put food out, certain
Mhm.
animals will get to it first and have their right to it first. There's a similar thing with the dawn chorus with species, and what we find is that within the species, where they are physically has quite a big impact. So, for example, the bird that is at the top of the tree will start singing before the one that is lower down,
Mhm.
partly to do with light levels and partly to do with character and assertiveness and dominance. We find that there is courage in the animal world, as there is in the human world. For a bird to be near the top of the tree, it is taking a higher risk. So that is quite
Yeah.
assertive behavior. So there's an external factor, which is it will be in a brighter, lighter world. But there's also, there is character. The birds that sing first are effectively saying to the rest of their species, they're saying, I'm the major player here.
Okay, so let's imagine that you are an alien and you don't know anything about seasons, about the nature in planet Earth, and you land in planet Earth, and you want to know which season more or less we are. Which things will you look at to discover if it's like late summer, if it's like early autumn? Yeah.
What I often do in natural navigation, and I encourage others to do, is to start top down. So we look for celestial cues. Are the sun, moon,
Hmm.
stars, or planets telling us? So we see, for example, we see different constellations at certain times of the year. If it's spring now, and I will expect to enjoy seeing Leo after the sun has gone down this evening, but I would see him in a different place in a couple of months' time, and I won't see him, in 6 months' time. Um, but so each constellation can give us a sense if it's nighttime. If it's daytime, then where the sun rises and sets and how high it is in the sky gives you a perfect calendar. So
Hmm.
So if you know a place well, you can tell certainly to the month, and if you're quite sensitive, almost to the week. It's easier at certain times of the year than others. You can tell what time of year it is by where the sun rises and sets, because if it's late June, we're near the summer solstice. The sun rises as far north of east as it ever will, and
Hmm.
sets as far north of west. And so the sun, and then the height of sun in the middle of the day, which we can look at as the height of shadows. So, put another way, you can do this in a very casual sense. You can just sort of say to yourself in the middle of the day, wow, the shadows seem quite short. Well, of
Hmm.
course, we're near June.
Yeah.
It might be May or it might be July. The shadows will still be quite short. But if they're unusually long, you're going to be near December. So we come down, so it's stars and sun, and then we come down. We see different patterns in the clouds
Hmm.
through the year as well. We have different movements, different patterns in the winds, different amounts of moisture. We have more storms in late summer, perhaps not always the same patterns exactly where you are. It'll be related to the shape of the land and where you are relative to the ocean. All of these things will have a. But the one thing that we all share is the weather is not identical all through the year. So
Yeah.
we have our local patterns. So we've come down from celestial through the kind of the weather, the meteorological, and then we can kind of look at the color of the land, which will be strongly related to what the sun has been doing and how much rain we've been having.
Hmm.
So the drier your part of the world, the more rain, the more important the role of rain and water in the seasons. I recently come back from Kenya, and they
Hmm.
they don't talk in terms of things like spring, summer, autumn, winter. They talk about wet and dry, when the rains come. But we still see a little bit of that in Europe, because
Hmm.
uh, most people who get to know any landscape well will get a sense from the greenery what time of year it is.
Yeah.
Um, if it's typically if it's mid-September, for example, things are looking very, very brown and dry. And if it's but there are some layers within this that people are less familiar with. I think it was the ancient poet Hesiod used the
Hmm.
expression. I think it was the greening of the grey, and that's when the land changes colour before we see any of the pretty signs of spring.
Hmm.
And one of the reasons is that the plants have to harvest lots of energy, lots of sunlight, but they also have to take on a lot of carbon, and they start
Okay.
doing that before the flowers or any of the other things that we think of as being very spring-like. And that changes what we see. It's like somebody's just turned up the green dial a little bit. We see it in sort of February, March.
Yeah, yeah, we see it absolutely. Yeah. So, I mean, we've just done it like a couple of weeks before, and I have to say I love it. But I would like to ask you, on as a natural navigator, what's your opinion on daylight saving time?
Oh, it's an interesting one, and I don't have really strong views in terms of the detail. I
Hmm.
don't, for example, say, well, this is what we should do instead. But
Yeah.
what I do find myself feeling quite strongly is that it's an opportunity for us to think about how artificial our clocks and time are anyway. And
Yeah.
the way I sometimes put this is because we're quite often talking about 1 hour's difference here or there, or and actually that doesn't completely change how we relate to things. So
Hmm.
we still fall into the same trap of thinking, it's the end of the day because my smartphone or my watch tells me it's the end of the day. But the way I put it is, if whatever clock you use, let's say it's a smartphone, you know, if that tells you that it's 4 a.m., but the sun is high in the sky, which are you going to trust? So
Hmm.
so in the modern era, I'm terrified that there might be one or two kind of 16-year-olds who'd be going, the sun
Hmm.
is wrong, but but if the sun is wrong, we've got bigger problems than smartphones. But
Yeah.
but there is a more fundamental point here, which is that all clocks and all calendars that we've created are helping us to keep tabs on what the Earth and Sun are doing. That's all they do. They allow us to keep tabs and to share it. So, for example, if you said, 10,000 years ago, if you said to somebody, I will. meet you, 3 hours walk over there,
Hmm.
in in a bit of time,
Hmm.
you'll probably never see them again. But if you say to them, you know, it was the full moon last night, I'm going to meet you at the top of that hill the
Hmm.
day after the next full moon when the shadow is at its shortest,
Yeah.
you will see them again because you've got
Okay.
a fixed point, a landmark. You've got a monthly measure in the moon, and you've got a clock in the length of the shadow because you're
Mm.
saying, "I will meet you." And that's how our ancestors thought, and we
Yeah.
still see the fingerprints of that in things like the date of Easter. So Easter
Mhm.
Sunday is the first Sunday after the first full moon after the vernal equinox. That is a good kind of reminder that that's how our ancestors were kind of thinking. It was the equinox. Okay, we've got the annual solar measure there. The moon, that's giving us a rough monthly kind of measure. And then the Sunday, the day of the week, is a more sort of recent way of looking at things. But that's the true measure of time. All of our labels, whether it's kind of the month of May or 7 p.m. or daylight saving or whatever it is, all of those are labels we're putting on things to help us keep tabs and share an idea with somebody who has the same tool. But it never ever changes. So
Mhm.
so if here's another silly thought experiment. If let's say you're looking at your watch and you're looking out the window at the sun, and then you suddenly remember that you forgot to change your watch to the daylight saving time.
Yeah.
As you change it, the sun doesn't suddenly move in the sky.
Yeah.
So the sun is time. And our watch and calendars are just us putting a layer on top of it to help us keep tabs.
Yeah. Yeah. So now let's go with the odd question. So what do you have hamster testicles tell us about like the nature or calendar?
Sorry, couldn't quite catch the
Yeah. Yeah.
question.
So what do you hamster testicles tell us about nature's calendar?
Yes, I mean, I
Yeah.
do like to throw in sort of real colourful examples, but
Yeah.
obviously it's a light sort of amusing example that we have evolved over millions of years, all
Hmm.
of us animals, including hamsters, to know that if you have vulnerable offspring, vulnerable children, and they're born on the 1st of November, a lot fewer are going to be around come the next summer than if they are born in spring or summer. And so that is what is sort of hardwired into a lot of animals' biorhythms, is from the length of day and night it will affect the reproductive
Uh-huh.
organs and cycles like that. And I mean, I did some research on the human side of this, and it's interesting because we have a lot of children born in midsummer or summer, certainly in the northern hemisphere, but then the
Mhm.
same is true in Australia, which is midwinter for them. So
Ah.
so back to testes size, yeah. So birds, hamsters, lots of others. We find that the reproductive organs are very much tuned into the length of day and night.
Yeah, so you've traveled all around the world, and of course you've traveled also like you've been in Spain also. So what would you say is like maybe your favorite landscape, Spanish landscape, like to go doing natural navigation?
Oh, well, there are so many parts of Spain that are very high on my must-do soon list. I haven't explored the northwest of Spain at all, and I
Really
haven't I haven't
beautiful.
done enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really must get there. Most of the walks I've done have been down south, and one of the most I think one of the most
Mhm.
beautiful scents in the whole world is a hot, dry mountain when you smell the
Yeah.
pine trees, and
Oh,
that
yeah, yeah.
that down on the southern mountains. I've done a bit of walking in a lot of the southern Spanish mountains, and that it's an arid hot landscape, but for a Brit that's exciting and different. And I can remember I was doing a residency at
Hmm.
an artist's sort of well, I don't basically
Yeah.
residency. I was there for a week or so, and I was exploring. And the almond trees were in blossom, and it was just, such a magical
Yeah.
mix. There is something magical for all of us when we are denied certain things that are important for life.
Hmm.
So if we go through an arid landscape, which is certainly true,
Yeah.
of parts of Spain for parts of the year, then we are wired as a species to get quite excited by signs of water.
Yeah.
So so those signs might be spotting some greenery, and in one of my books, How to Read a Tree, I talk about
Yeah, I
spotting
remember.
some walnut trees, and it was a clear sign to me that a change of nutrients and moisture, because those trees just would not pop up in a dry landscape randomly. But one of the most powerful signs of water is the smell of it. And
Mm.
in fact, when I was in Kenya recently, they would expect to smell rain before they felt it, and it was one of their real big clues. And we have this experience. It's quite emotional for lots of people when you're in summer and you haven't had rain for perhaps a few weeks, and then you get that first smell of the rain mixing with the ground, and it activates certain bacteria, and it releases certain oils, and it creates this very, very distinctive, almost kind of fingerprinted
Mm.
smell of what's known as petrichor.
Yeah.
And for people, my research and my personal experience, tally in this area. It makes us feel good because it's not that long ago that it could have been a sign of survival.
Mhm.
You can imagine walking,
Of course, yeah.
across the dry landscapes of Spain, and maybe you haven't had a drink for a day and a half. Things are getting very,
Yeah,
very
yeah.
serious. That smell, and what we find is the people are able to pick up very, very small traces of that. We're talking about a few molecules. There are certain molecules where we need quite a good dose before we go, oh yeah, that's what I'm smelling. But petrichor, the smell of recent rain, is one that tiny doses, tiny quantities, and our brain recognizes it straight away. And it's even more true in the animal kingdom. So the real dry landscape animals like camels can pick up a few molecules of this, and they can scent water literally many kilometers away.
Yeah, so now we are more or less in April. So what should people look for in the nature, be it in the countryside, be it like when they are commuting, like in this time of the year? What should they look for?
Yeah, we'll do our top down. I've mentioned Leo, but that is a really good one to look for in April and spring generally. He's a really friendly constellation because he really does look like a lion. The
Okay.
head is like a question mark backwards.
Hmm.
There aren't any other constellations you'll confuse him with. And he rises in the east, moves across the south, and
Mm.
sets in the west. And the rump of the lion, I mean, in the book, I kind of spell it out with an illustration, but there are two stars which make up effectively the hind quarters of the lion. When the top one is directly above the bottom one, it makes a perfect
Hmm.
compass. It points south for you. So we can then come. The other thing to really notice is we're still in the time of fast change. So the length of day is changing very fast at the moment. By the time we get to June, late June, the length of day doesn't change. So we want to kind of enjoy that. If we then come down a little bit, we can think about the weather. So what we're starting to find at this time of year is the sun is starting to put a lot of energy into the land. And what that means is we're getting thermals, which changes the shapes of clouds and makes rain showers and storms much more likely. So, so we get plenty of storms in winter, and very often people think of winter as the time of storms, which is not wrong. But the type of storms we get in winter are what are known as frontal storms, and that's where a big weather mass, air mass, is coming in and moving over the land. as we get to April, what we're finding is local showers and storms, which you
Mhm.
tend not to get in winter because the sun needs to be high enough to heat a patch of the land quite sort of energetically. This
Yeah.
leads to a column of rising air. So this time of year, the thing to be looking for is if in the morning you see any clouds that are taller than they are wide,
Uh-huh.
that is a sign of a thermal of unstable air, and it means the chances of rain showers and storms are much higher.
Ah,
And that's a classic sort of April sign.
okay.
Um, and then as we come down, we're going to start seeing some wildflowers that we haven't seen for a long time. And I really encourage people to not just stop at beauty. Beauty is wonderful, and it's why we enjoy nature very
Yeah.
often. But whenever we see something that's beautiful, we can actually enjoy the beauty more by saying, "Why are you the way you are?" And
Mm.
then we find there's a compass in the wildflowers. They're facing towards the southern light, but also there's a map. The
Yeah.
each flower is telling us something about the soil and the activity. It's telling us about what the animals are doing. In the case of people, one of the simplest but most beautiful maps at this time of year, April and into May, is that if you have a heavily used path through a park, let's say,
Mhm.
with perhaps some grass either side of it, what you'll find is on the path itself, there are no flowers, there's no grass, there's
Yeah.
too much footfall, it kills everything. And if we look quite far away from the path, we find that there's not a lot of variety. But right next to the path, where there's a little bit of footfall, but not too much, not so much that it kills everything, we find a huge amount of variety.
Yeah.
In the book, I call it the species spike, because what's
Oh,
happening? Yeah, what's
yeah.
happening there is if there's too much activity, we have nothing, everything's dead. And if there's no activity, people might guess that you get a lot of variety because it's easier for nature. But actually, what happens is if there's no footfall from people or animals, what happens is one or two species will dominate. And so you don't get diversity. What you find is there might be in the wild, there might be, one or two undergrowth species that do really well and they
Mhm.
bully everything out of the way.
Hmm.
But where there's a little bit of footfall, what it does is it stops the undergrowth plants taking over. So where I am at the moment, we get bracken and brambles, for example, and they just take over. And it means it's very hard for the small wildflowers to do well. But if somebody walks a bit over that area, it
Mhm.
kills off those plants, and it means you get this spike in species. You might see, maybe 10 different wildflowers in a place where people walk a little bit, not too much, not too little, but a little
Mhm.
bit. We get this wonderful explosion, and
Wow.
from that flows a whole load of other activity. You get more insects, and when you get more insects, you get more birds. So we can enjoy the dawn chorus at this time of year. Another thing to really enjoy is the way the dawn chorus is making a map. Try to
Okay.
notice, if you walk for 5 minutes to work or something like that, you're going to pass a tree, or if you're lucky, you'll pass some trees in a park or something, or if you're in a wilder place, you'll pass lots. Just notice how the dawn chorus is a map, that it spikes at
Mm.
places where things change. So the birds really like it when two habitats meet each other. So
Mhm.
if you have the woods, for example, it will be quite quiet well outside the woods, and it will be quite quiet right in the middle of the wood, but at the edge of the wood you get this wonderful explosion of sound, because the dawn chorus it's not just a clock or a calendar, it's also a
Yeah.
map.
Wow, that's wonderful. Yeah, so we are like getting to the end of the interview. So if you had to give only one reason for the reader to go read this book, which would be that reason?
Oh, I write all of my books so that people will never experience things the same way again, and it's the nicest feedback I get from readers. I get emails most weeks where people are saying, "I will never look at this the same way again," and the reason is just because there is a reward. The brain
Mm.
wants to see these clues and signs. Once it helped keep us alive, but now it helps keep our sense of wonder alive. So if 5 minutes of wonder each day throughout the year appeals to you, then please enjoy the book.
I'm sure they're gonna love it. Bueno, pues ha sido un placer estar hoy aquí con Tristan Gooley, autor de Las estaciones ocultas. Ya en librerías, estoy seguro de que lo vais a disfrutar mucho. Muchas gracias por estar con nosotros. Thanks so much, Tristan Gooley, for being with us today. It's been an absolute pleasure and an honor.
Oh, it was a really enjoyable chat. Muchas gracias, and yeah, thanks for all the work you're doing.